This is a reading from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, verse 6 and on. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. Spiritual poverty. I feel like I've heard it discussed a lot, but I don't really know and understand what it is. And when I started praying the rosary, I would follow like the US CCB, or like United States Conference of Bishops, whatever, had a website or a post on a website saying how to pray the rosary. And with each mystery, it would offer a spiritual fruit or fruit of the mystery or something to pray and think about. And for the Nativity, the third joyful mystery, it said spiritual poverty, which I didn't really get. I kind of got the idea of the Nativity as poverty, like coming from nothing. You know, Jesus wasn't rich, but yet he was still the king of the world and all that. But spiritual poverty never really made sense to me, and I've heard it mentioned other times too. But I'm going to explain it a bit in this video. Some ways I've come to understand spiritual poverty and realize the importance of it. So I'll talk about it in terms of, I guess, anger and general dispositions. But real quick definition of spiritual poverty: it's a mistrust of our strength and throwing our trust, our hope, our strength, and reliance on God and God's providence. So basically a right orientation of ourselves to God, seeing us as low, as weak, and seeing our source of strength from God, recognizing we are poor poor in spirit. Like when you hear the Beatitudes, recognizing, because you don't want to be like low, depressed. Like when you hear poor in spirit, it can kind of connotate that. But poor in spirit in the sense of like spiritual poverty, poor, to some degree, a poor view of ourselves, recognizing how we're prone to sin and how we're poor, we're beggars to God, and we rely on His grace. So, illustrating spiritual poverty. I will talk about the Nativity in a bit, but first, anger. So I heard this from one of my friends, which was really interesting. I think it was from not Saint Anthony. It's gonna bother me if I don't get it. I'm not gonna get it. Wait, it's the guy who founded the Friars, not Saint Anthony. Saint Francis, I believe. I believe it was a writing of Saint Francis, where he said that all anger is a lack of spiritual poverty. All anger is a lack of spiritual poverty. So, an angry situation is often where you feel that you have been wronged. Someone has wronged you. They shouldn't have done that, and you deserve better. And the way my friend was explaining this to me is that that's a lack of spiritual poverty in the sense of reliance on God's will, or lack of reliance on God's will in that situation, where you're mad that someone slighted you, that someone wronged you, and you're angry at them, and you think that this should have gone a different way. But in a sense there, you're also kind of relying on, well, that what you think is right of how that should have gone, and specifically like what your will was for that situation, and not as much a complete submission to the will of God. And submitting to the will of God after that happens, you're recognizing that, okay, like, I don't know, someone bumps you in traffic, like, it may not have been God's perfect will, but He permitted that to happen. So it's God's will is an element of that. And being angry at that is sort of trying to have full control over the situation, in a sense, too. Angry that you didn't have full control over the situation, so that friend didn't say something rude to you, or that person didn't cut you off in traffic. You're wishing you had control. You're angry because the lack of control, but that's because you're not giving up the control to God and submitting and allowing His will to dictate your life. We also see spiritual poverty in this scene of the Nativity. So this kind of took me a while to grasp, but we're called to imitate Christ as Christians. Great book, Imitation of Christ, great spiritual book. We're called to imitate Christ. And Christ is born in a pretty bad spot, like in a manger amongst animals. He's supposed to be the king of the Jews. He's born in poverty. And born as a child, just like every other child, we can we know that Christ was reliant on his parents, on Mary and Joseph, for food, for protection, for warmth, for not getting eaten by a wild animal, whatever it may be. Christ was reliant on his parents. And in this scene, in imitating Christ, we must realize the reliance we have, yes, on our worldly parents, but our heavenly parents, on God our Father and Mary our Mother. We must realize how much we need God's grace to succeed. And a point here which is difficult is seeing people who aren't religious, who don't follow God, who are strictly atheist, succeed in the world. I don't really have an answer for this, to be honest. If anyone does, please comment. I don't normally read the comments, but I'd be interested for this one. Because we're taught, like Jesus says, abide in me. Apart from me, you can do nothing. That's spiritual poverty, like recognizing, oh, it's raining really bad outside now. Oh, the weather is really nice today. Now it's raining. God's will, somehow. This spiritual poverty, recognizing our weakness. We need God. We need God's grace to succeed. But there's atheists, people who scorn the Christian faith, who scorn Christ, who still succeed in this world. To be honest, I don't really know. I don't really know or understand what the proper response is to that, or how that all works in God's plan. I will say we see it throughout the Bible, throughout the stories of the Old Testament. The enemies of the Israelites, besting them, having power over them. Christ being born into the Roman Empire, being persecuted by the Romans, by some of the Pharisees. I guess in a sense, if we read the temptation of Jesus in the desert with Satan, Satan says, bow down and worship me, for I have control over all the kingdoms, and I will give them to you. Or not control, I think he says, all the kingdoms of the earth belong to me, which is a massive statement on politics, on authority in the world, saying that Satan has control over these powers of the world. He has access to them to grant them to Christ if Christ worships him. So Satan, also in the book of Job, God says, where were you, Satan? He says, I was prowling about the earth, or going to and fro the earth, or something like that. So one answer to this possibly could be in seeing atheists or agnostic people having worldly success. It's not exactly worldly success that the Bible is talking about when it says, abide in me. Apart from me, you can do nothing. It's not making money. It's not that. It's spiritual success. It's having a good relationship with God, that which relationship which matters most, and orientating our souls properly to God so we can love our neighbors to the best of our ability. That is where it requires God's grace. And God may still give his grace and his love to those who don't believe in him to help them along that goal, because he desires that for everyone. But he definitely gives it to us, to those who believe in him, when we realize we need it, when we realize we beg, when we knock, so that door might be opened. So I hope this video helped in illustrating spiritual poverty. Again, it kind of is a confusing thing, but I think I explained it somewhat well. Just in short, one more time. Spiritual poverty is mistrusting ourselves. Not thinking we're terrible, but realizing that we can't do it nearly at all by ourselves, that we need God. We need God desperately. We need his grace. We rely on him. He loved us into existence. He continues to be with us, to remain with us, and we need him. And we rely on him, and he is great, and he loves us, and we need his protection and his love. Rely on God, not your own strength. God bless.